Destroy failed exception. Execution exception. Expand veto exception. Font format exception. General security exception. GSS exception. Illegal class format exception. Interrupted exception. Introspection exception. Invalid application exception. Invalid MIDI data exception. Invalid preferences format exception. Invalid target object type exception. IO exception. JAXB exception. JM exception. Key selector exception. Lambda conversion exception. Last owner exception. Line unavailable exception. Marshal exception. MIDI unavailable exception. Mine type parse exception. Mine type parse exception. Naming exception. Non-invertible transform exception. Not bound exception. Not owner exception. Parse exception. Parser configuration exception. Printer exception. Print exception. Privileged action exception. Property veto exception. Reflective operation exception. Refresh failed exception. Remarshal exception. Runtime exception. SAX exception. Script exception. Server not active exception. SOAP exception. SQL exception. Timeout exception. Too many listeners exception. Transformer exception. Transform exception. Unmodifiable class exception. Unsupported audio file exception. Unsupported callback exception. Unsupported flavor exception. Unsupported look and feel exception. URI reference exception. URI syntax exception. User exception. Exit exception. XML parse exception. XML signature exception. XML stream exception. XPath exception. Public class exception. Extends throwable. The class exception and its subclasses are a form of throwable that indicates conditions that a reasonable application might want to catch. The class exception and any subclasses that are not also subclasses of runtime exception are checked exceptions. Checked exceptions need to be declared in the method or constructor's throw clause if they can be thrown by the execution of the method or constructor and propagate outside the method or constructor boundary. Since JDK 1.0. See also error serialized form. See the Java language specification 11.2 compile time checking of exceptions. Constructor summary. Constructors. Exception. Constructs a new exception with null as its detail message. Exception string message. Constructs a new exception with the specified detail message. Exception string message throwable cause. Constructs a new exception with the specified detail message and cause. Protected exception string message throwable cause Boolean enables null, cause toString, which typically contains the class and detail message of cause. Method summary. Methods inherited from class Java lang throwable and suppressed. Fill in stack trace. Get cause. Get localized message. Get message. Get stack trace. Get suppressed. Init cause. Print stack trace. Print stack trace. Print stack trace. Set stack trace to string. Methods inherited from class Java lang object. Clone equals finalize. Get class hashcode. Notify all. Wait. Constructor detail. Exception. Public exception. Constructs a new exception with null as its detail message. The cause is not initialized and may subsequently be initialized by a call to birds. The cause is not initialized and may subsequently be initialized by a call to throwable init cause Java lang throwable. Exception. Public exception string message. Constructs a new exception with the specified detail message. The cause is not initialized and may subsequently be initialized by a call to throwable init cause Java lang throwable. Parameters. Message. The detail message. The detail message is saved for later retrieval by the throwable getMessage method. Exception. Public exception string message. Throwable cause. Constructs a new exception with the specified detail message and cause. Note that the detail message associated with cause is not automatically incorporated in this exception's detail message. Parameters. Message. The detail message, which is saved for later retrieval by the throwable getMessage method. Cause. The cause, which is saved for later retrieval by the throwable getCause method. A null value is permitted and indicates that the cause is non-existent or unknown. Since 1.4. Exception. Public exception. Throwable cause. Constructs a new exception with the specified cause and a detail message of cause equals null ternary null cause toString, which typically contains the class and detail message of cause. This constructor is useful for exceptions